A Christmas tree wound in colorful lights twinkles on full display before a frosted living room window. Beside the tree stands a small tray of milk and cookies. A tiny dog is also curled up soundly on the floor. All is calm. All is bright. Christmas Eve, 1938. A 4-foot stuffed teddy bear sits propped up against the nearby fireplace. After a beat, the teddy bear seemingly nods off. The bear's head springs back up, but drops down again. Inside the bear is young Jim Galinack. Young Jim's head remains slumped until the soft jingle of sleigh bells finally awakens him. He scans the quiet room, settling on the couch. There, another smaller stuffed teddy bear sits in a dozed-off position as well. Young Jim wobbles to his feet and shuffles over to it. He shakes the smaller bear to try and wake it.
Tyler! Wake up, Tyler!
The smaller bear is out cold. Young Jim tries again, when suddenly, a muffled thud is heard on the roof. Young Jim looks up towards the noise. He finally decides to give up on the smaller bear. He quickly drops to the floor, resting his back against the wall between the tree and fireplace. Once positioned, young Jim goes limp. Inside the bear, crudely cut eye holes allow young Jim an obscure view of the room. He eagerly waits, watching with wide eyes. Young Jim listens as something scrapes and scratches down the fireplace beside him. Finally, a man dressed in red steps into view. The tiny dog is now awake too. It repeatedly barks at the intruder. With the wave of his hand, the man showers the dog with a sparkling mist of golden dust. Without hassle, the dog curls up into a ball and falls asleep instantly. The man continues about his business. He kneels down next to the tree, finally giving young Jim a better look at him. It's Santa Claus, complete with rosy red cheeks and a snow-white beard. He pulls presents from a large velvet sack and begins to position them under the tree, when he suddenly freezes and looks directly at young Jim. Inside the bear, young Jim's eyes rapidly blink in disbelief. With a twinkle in his eyes, Santa gives a knowing smile before dusting young Jim with another handful of golden magic. Through the bear's eyes, the room begins to tilt. Young Jim slumps to the floor with a thud and a snore. Later that night, the now awake tiny dog bites and tugs at the passed-out teddy bear. The bear finally sits up and pulls its head off. Young Jim twinkles with excitement underneath. He quickly springs to his feet and removes the head from the smaller teddy bear as well. Young Tyler Galinack, Jim's brother, finally wakes up.
Tyler, I saw him!
Young Jim rushes upstairs to his parents' bedroom. Moments later, Jim's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Galinack, both in their early 30s, are fast asleep in the dark room. The bedroom door suddenly flies open and in runs young Jim, still dressed as the teddy bear. He throws on the lights and leaps onto their bed, bouncing around them.
I saw him! I saw him!
Oh, my goodness! Oh, my goodness! Jim, honey, you can't do that to us!
But I saw him! He's real! Santa's really real!
Now young Tyler runs into the room. He's in a crying fit.
I didn't see him!
Mr. Galinack rocks out of bed in frustration. He ushers young Jim and Tyler out of their room.
Jim, you fell asleep and had another dream. Now get back to bed, or I'll tell Santa to put you on the naughty list.
Young Jim gasps. He and young Tyler quickly hurry out of the room. Mr. Galinack closes the door behind them. He then flips off the lights and sinks back into bed.
He is just a boy, you know.
Yeah, well, it's about time he grows up. He can't believe in fairy tales forever, Marcia.
Mrs. Galinack shakes her head and lies back down. 27 years later, a handsome, well-dressed man in his 30s sits at a massive dining room table covered in a glorious feast. He's surrounded by a now older Mr. and Mrs. Galinack, his beautiful wife Linda, and numerous aunts and uncles. It's Thanksgiving, 1965. The well-dressed man is in the middle of telling the table a joke.
He says, frankly, I don't know what a low-yield bomb is, but it sounds a little like my wife.
Everyone at the table doubles over laughing. The well-dressed man laughs along with them until he notices the plate of turkey has been picked clean. He sighs, then impatiently shouts over his shoulder.
Hey, Jim, you're out of turkey.
Jim Galinack, a little pudgy, now 35 with a thick beard and ugly Christmas apron around his neck, sits at a slightly smaller kids' table of young nieces, nephews, and cousins.
Coming right up.
Jim rushes away to the kitchen. He's full throttle in a world that is used to idling. The well-dressed man, now revealed to be Jim's younger brother Tyler, rolls his eyes. Linda frowns at him.
Tyler, why don't you go give him a hand? It's a lot to cook for a big family.
What's the point? He's got a certain way he needs everything to be done.
Mr. and Mrs. Galinack interject from across the table.
Oh, I just think he's afraid of the naughty list. Thanks to your father.
No. Linda, trust us. You'll get less of a headache if you just let him do his thing, as annoying as that may be.
Honestly, this is the least he can do. I had to grow up with a target on my back because my older brother still believed in Santa.
Linda throws up her hands.
All right.
Meanwhile, Jim removes another perfectly golden turkey from the oven in his kitchen. The counters are a mess from the hell that is holiday cooking. While Jim slices the turkey, a black and white news broadcast plays on a small, portable TV nearby. A newscaster speaks directly to the viewers at home.
As for tonight's story, this news hits a little closer to home. Local authorities are on high alert for not one, but two wanted individuals. An unidentified masked robber presumed to have hit numerous banks across the Midwest, as well as Nicholas Rigoletto, a con man with ties to the crime family of the same name. Both men are now thought to be here in Illinois, and the police are welcoming any information to aid in their apprehension.
Jim has dressed up a large plate with the new slices of turkey. He passes the TV on his way back into the dining room.
Naughty, naughty, naughty.
Jim sets the new turkey down on the table.
Finally, I thought you got lost in there.
Everyone digs in, instantly returning to their conversations.
Ha! My own kitchen? That's a good one.
Mr. Galinack tries to wave him off.
Jim, please, we're trying to eat.
Right. Sorry. Enjoy.
Unfazed, Jim heads back over to the kids' table. He sits down next to his niece, Lisa. Her face is beet red.
Uncle Jim, is Santa real?
What? Of course he is.
Sitting across from Lisa is Jim's nephew, Michael, who is also nicely dressed in a fancy sweater.
Well, Grandpa said he isn't.
Well, I've actually seen him.
Yeah, when you were dreaming.
Whatever. Who cares what you think, Michael?
Michael sneers. He looks Jim up and down.
Aren't you a little old to believe in Santa?
Nuh-uh.
The rest of the kids at the table snicker, almost like mature, snotty adults. Lisa's bottom lip begins to quiver. Jim leans in close and softly whispers to her so the other kids can't hear.
Oh, Lisa, don't listen to them. You can never be too old to believe. Plus, I bet Santa's bringing you the best presents this year.
Lisa brightens up with a smile. Jim playfully nudges her when a nearby cuckoo clock chimes.
Oh dear, what could that be for?
Lisa bounces in her seat.
Your Christmas kickoff!
Why, you're right. Let's show these Scrooges how it's done, shall we?
In Jim's garage, the entire length of one wall is covered with electrical boxes, homemade circuit boards, and a rat's nest of wires plugged into power strips, a real headache that would put Clark Griswold to shame. Jim makes his way down the wall, flipping every switch, button, and breaker visible. Outside, bit by bit, hundreds of beautiful lights and animatronic Christmas figures burst to life, transforming Jim's house into a festive wonderland. The quantity and creativity of lights are leaps ahead of the 1960s norm. As the last bulb lights up, the street is revealed to be packed with a parade of waiting cars. People from all over town have gathered to watch the annual kickoff. The never-ending line of cars snakes up and down the street. Everyone cheers at the dazzling scenery. Moments later, the garage door rises. Inside, all is dark until a bright red light shines into view. Jim emerges from the darkness, riding on a red and gold golf cart. His sleigh is seemingly pulled by 8 tiny plastic reindeer, led by the most famous one of all. Lisa joyfully helps steer the golf cart on Jim's lap. A customized hot cocoa machine has also been outfitted on the back of the golf cart where the rear seats would be. Jim and Lisa ride along, visiting each waiting car to make them cups of cocoa. A young father takes a picture of his wife and kids in front of Jim's house. The young father shouts to Jim as they roll by.
You've really outdone yourself this year, Jim!
What can I say? Santa's coming to town!
Meanwhile, across town, Officer Diaz rolls to a stop in her cruiser outside of Ray's diner. While she waits for the stoplight to turn green, Officer Lundy's voice squawks through her radio.
Diaz, you out and about?
She picks it up.
Sure am.
You should swing by Jim's place. Check out his electrical bill.
Officer Diaz chuckles when something catches her eye. A gangly, disheveled man with a white beard in his 70s, soon to be known simply as Nick, exits Ray's diner. As he shuffles down the sidewalk, Nick is apparently recognized by a young child walking with her mother. The child pulls at her mother's arm, pointing at Nick as they pass him.
Mommy, look at Santa!
Sweetheart, it's not polite to point.
But it's Santa!
Nick nervously glances back at the child when he notices Officer Diaz's cruiser at the light. The stoplight finally turns green, and Officer Diaz slowly proceeds. As she does, Nick also shifts to a brisk walk, periodically glancing back at the cruiser. Officer Diaz picks up her radio again. She coasts behind Nick, keeping her distance. She watches him closely.
Hey, Lundy. Could you confirm the details of that APB issued for Nicholas Rigoletto?
Yeah. Caucasian male in his early 70s, about 5'7", white beard.
Nick does one final glance at the cruiser before breaking into a sprint. He's quick for his age.
Oh, no, you don't.
Officer Diaz peels out after him. Nick reels into a dark alley. Officer Diaz cuts the wheel and squeals to a stop at the alley's entrance, boxing Nick in. She jumps out of her cruiser as Nick nervously searches the dead-end alley for an escape.
Sir, I'm gonna need you to come with me.
Oh, no, I can't do that. This is a big misunderstanding.
Well, how about I take you downtown and we figure it out then?
Officer Diaz steps towards Nick with her handcuffs. With nowhere to go, Nick attempts to dodge and evade her. This surprisingly works at first, but Officer Diaz eventually tackles him into a mound of trash bags. Back outside Jim's house, Officer Lundy sits with his partner in another police cruiser on the street. Officer Lundy anxiously waits with his radio in hand.
Give us an update, Diaz. Do you have something?
Jim and Lisa roll up next to the cruiser. Jim steps off the golf cart and does his best police officer impression.
Now, I'm sure you're wondering why I pulled you over.
Jim laughs at himself as he helps Lisa prepare the officers some cocoa. Officer Lundy tries his radio again.
Diaz, come in. Do you need backup?
Jim leans down into the cruiser's window.
I guess crime never sleeps, huh?
Again, Jim laughs at himself. Just as he's about to hand the officers their cocoa, Officer Diaz finally comes through on the radio.
Dispatch, this is Officer Diaz confirming a 1095 of one Nicholas Rigoletto. We're en route to the station now.
You gotta let me go. I'm Santa Claus. You can't do this.
Everyone shares quick, confused looks. Jim, not knowing any better, gapes at the radio with his jaw on the floor, as does Lisa.
Did he just say what I think he said?
Sure did. Looks like I've got the one and only Kris Kringle in my back seat.
Alrighty. We'll meet you back at the station.
Officer Lundy clips the radio back onto the dashboard. He then looks over to Jim outside their cruiser.
Sorry, Jim. It looks like there won't be a Christmas this year.
The officers snicker and drive off. For the first time in his life, Jim is left speechless. Lisa is frozen in the same shocked state. Back up at the house, Tyler steps outside.
Hey, Jim. Did you make any pie?
The cups of cocoa drop to the ground from Jim's frozen hands. Later, at the police station, Detective Fox stands at a two-way mirror. He observes Nick, who sits handcuffed to a small table in a dark interrogation room. A bright light is pointed directly at his face. Detective Swanson sits across from Nick. He quickly rises and leaves the room, unsatisfied. Detective Swanson then enters the viewing room and joins Detective Fox at the mirror.
Anything?
No. Nothing but that Father Christmas crap. The man's desperate.
I don't know. Are we confident this is the right guy?
Swanson hands Fox a folder of Nick's alleged rap sheet.
Don't let him fool you, Fox. He's a con man. That's what he does. He's been scamming rich widows out of their life savings for the past 20 years.
Well, not anymore, he's not.
Swanson chuckles at his naivete.
That's what I used to think. See, I busted Nick here before, but he always walks away scot-free. His connections to the Rigoletto crime family makes him practically untouchable.
How should we handle the press then? If word spreads about this, the mob will have him out before supper.
Let's run with his story. A two-bit con man claiming to be Santa Claus is headed to Hillgate. Just keep his name and face out of it.
Swanson heads for the door.
I want to lose this scumbag in the system.
Cut to black. A series of newspapers then quickly spin into view, filling the screen. Their headlines read, Santa behind bars, Christmas cancelled, and kids cry over con man clause. The last newspaper to fill the screen features a photo of crying children. After a moment, the newspaper is quickly lowered to reveal a distraught Jim at his furniture-making job in a woodshop. Jim sets the newspaper of crying children down on his desk. It's heavily decorated with green and red tinsel, twinkling lights, and a complete train set that runs along the desk's entire perimeter. The train's high-pitched whistle never shuts up.
This is horrible.
He takes a swig of milk from a scotch glass. A half-empty bottle of milk sits nearby. Jim is weary with heavy bags under his eyes. Stress and anxiety have been eating away at him. Jim's co-worker, Robert, tries to stretch fabric over the frame of a couch all by himself. He glances over at Jim.
Come on, Jim. Why do you do that to yourself? You know what that stuff does to you?
It's a disease. I can't help it.
Robert shakes his head while Jim fights back hiccups.
I gotta get him out.
Who?
Santa.
The guy in the papers?
No, the guy in jail. Someone has to do something.
Yeah, they need to come over here and help me with this couch. You've been wasting time all morning reading that thing.
You know, you're right. I need to write the North Pole a letter. Tell him to send some elves. They're small. They could fit through the bars.
Jim, I shouldn't have to tell you. It's not really Santa.
Jim looks over at Robert with a sense of hope.
It's not?
No, I mean, he's not... Santa's not real.
How can you say that? After everything he's done for you.
Because I'm not 8 anymore, and neither are you. My own kid knows better.
You wouldn't understand.
Jim's wavering hands pour himself another glass of milk when their secretary Stacy stops at the doorway with an envelope.
Would one of you be able to do me a big favor and run this over to the bank? I'm already swamped and we need to get these checks out ASAP.
Robert stands from the couch and retrieves the envelope. He then walks over and slaps it against Jim's chest.
Here, make yourself useful. God knows you won't be any real help today.
Jim grudgingly heads for the door with the envelope in an almost tantrum-like state.
Besides, everyone knows you don't bust someone out of jail unless it's an inside job.
Stacy and Robert watch Jim shuffle out of the room.
He isn't drunk, is he?
No, he's just lactose intolerant.
Stacy snorts and heads back to the front of the shop. Robert is left alone with the whistle from Jim's desk train. He stares at the train for a beat before picking up a hammer and smashing it. The train finally dies. Later that day, Jim stands slouched at a courtesy desk in a bank. He mindlessly stares down at a blank deposit slip. Flashbacks in the form of talking heads float around him.
Jim, you fell asleep and had another dream. Now get back to bed, or I'll tell Santa to put you on the naughty list.
Aren't you a little old to believe in Santa?
Sorry, Jim. Looks like there won't be a Christmas this year.
Hey, Jim, did you make any pie?
Besides, everyone knows you don't bust someone out of jail unless it's an inside job.
Jim's flashbacks are interrupted when a bank robber, armed with a pistol, pantyhose over his head, and an empty bag slung around his chest, bursts into the bank. Jim spins around in shock.
This is a robbery! Keep your hands where I can see them. No one gets hurt.
To show he means business, the bank robber, soon to be known as Boyd, fires a shot into the air. A large chunk of ceiling tile falls on a nearby bank guard just as he was about to take Boyd down.
Except for that guy.
Jim slowly swivels back around and glances down at a dispenser of scotch tape on the courtesy desk. He tilts his head, weighing a newly formed idea.
An inside job.
Meanwhile, over by the teller's window, Boyd lines up all his hostages.
Everyone, get over here so I can see ya! Except you.
Boyd throws the scared young female teller his empty bag.
Empty the registers.
As the teller begins filling the bag with money, she nervously glances at the emergency button on the side of the desk.
And don't get any wise ideas.
Yeah, no funny business, sweetheart.
Boyd turns to see Jim leap up onto the courtesy desk. Jim's nose, eyebrows, and lips are severely distorted with dozens of scotch tape strips. He also has a hand shoved under his shirt, faking possession of a weapon. Boyd steps away from the teller and waves his gun at Jim.
Hey! Get down!
You heard him. On the ground!
The hostages begin to lower to their hands and knees.
No, I didn't say that! Stand back up!
The hostages exchange confused looks. They slowly stand again. Boyd turns back to Jim. With Boyd now distracted, the teller ever so slightly slides her hand towards the emergency button. Meanwhile, Boyd looks at Jim with wild eyes.
What do you think you're doing?
Jim speaks loud enough to ensure everyone in the bank can hear him.
I'm your partner. We're robbing this bank together.
No, you're not. This is my operation.
Right. Sorry. Take it away.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Wait, no! You got no part in this.
What are you talking about? We've been planning this thing for 6 months.
I don't know you.
That's good, yeah. We don't know each other, just in case we get caught.
Boyd finally tears the pantyhose off his head. He's boiling red mad.
We ain't gonna get caught!
An orchestra of cocking guns cuts Boyd off. He and Jim slowly look towards the bank's entrance. Dozens of police officers have entered the bank with their weapons drawn and ready. Moments later, the bank is now surrounded by police cruisers and a crowd of spectators. Officer Lundy and his partner escort Jim and Boyd out of the bank with their hands cuffed behind their backs. Jim's face is still tangled in tape.
This isn't the first bank we robbed, and it won't be the last.
Jim's makeshift disguise morphs his giddy smile into a sinister grin. From behind Jim, Boyd tries to kick at him.
Would you shut the hell up?
Jim and Boyd are led to different police cruisers.
Jesus, Jim. I can't believe you'd do something like this.
How else do you think I pay for my Christmas addiction?
Officer Lundy shoves Jim into the back of his cruiser. Now in a courtroom, Jim stands before a judge's bench. He's reached the sentencing process. The gallery behind Jim is packed with family members and friends.
Mr. Galanak, you're being charged with second-degree armed robbery. How do you plead?
Jim grimaces. He does his best Joe Friday impression.
Guilty as charged, Your Highness. It's time for me to pay my dues. I've bought myself a one-way ticket to the Big House, the Slammer, the Hooskow, the Gray Bar Hotel, the Jug, straight to jail. Don't pass go.
The judge sighs and pulls off her glasses, throwing in the towel.
Very well. By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I hereby sentence you to serve 5 years at Hillgate Penitentiary. Effective immediately.
The judge raps her gavel. An ecstatic Jim is escorted out of the courtroom by the sheriff's deputies. Jim's family is stunned in disbelief and sadness. Jim's niece, Lisa, wipes tears from her eyes. She looks up to Tyler, Jim's brother.
But Daddy, what about Christmas? We can't have it without Uncle Jim.
Tyler stares forward, unblinking.
Who's gonna make the pie?
Lisa bursts into more tears. Now, a white prison bus approaches Hillgate Penitentiary. The massive compound is essentially an above-ground dungeon, fortified with unscalable stone walls and even taller guard towers. Prison guards swing open the outer gate to welcome in the bus. The prison yard is packed with hundreds of inmates. They all swarm to the loading dock to meet the new members of their incarcerated family. Moments later, a depressing conga line of chained fresh fish shuffle off the bus. They're met by a horde of taunting inmates who violently shake and beat on the fences around them. The only person that actually seems excited to be there is Jim, who hops off the bus with a wide, toothy grin. He waves at the inmates as he waddles by.
Hi, hello there! Does anyone happen to know where I can find Santa?
The inmates all belly laugh. One in particular, Buddy, motions to someone on the opposite side of the fence.
Hey, the only lap you'll be sitting on is his.
Jim looks over and recoils at the sight of Winston McClare, a 6'5", 260-pound slab of pure muscle with cauliflower ears. Winston eyeballs Jim like the man is his next chew toy. Jim keeps a scared, nervous eye on Winston as he continues toward the prison with the rest of the fresh fish. The fresh fish are now lined up in the poorly lit loading dock. A steely-eyed man dressed in a dark, immaculate suit steps out from the shadows. This is Warden Blackwell, the type of boy who was forced to grow up just a little too soon. Starting from Jim, Blackwell walks down the line of amateur cons. New souls to watch rot in a cell always brings a crooked smile to Blackwell's face.
Welcome to Hillgate, gentlemen. My name is Mr. Blackwell. I'm the warden of this fine establishment. Depending on your sentence, this will be your new home for the following months, years, or maybe even the rest of your sad, pathetic lives. Now, they say prisons have 4 major purposes: retribution, incapacitation, deterrence, and rehabilitation. Unfortunately for you, I only truly believe in 3 of those things. I'll leave it up to you to figure out which one I play a little fast and loose with.
Blackwell has made his way to the front of the line.
Do I make myself clear?
Oh, I actually have a question.
Every head grinds towards Jim at the end of the line.
Yeah, hi. Could you tell me which cell Santa's staying in?
Blackwell stomps back over to Jim, who flinches.
So help me God, I will have you eating through a straw if you...
Miss Walker, an attentive lady in a strictly professional pencil dress, has slipped her way into the room without being noticed. A large binder is tucked under her arm. Blackwell's entire demeanor instantly shifts at the sight of Miss Walker. He dusts off a smile, looks back to Jim, then breaks into a friendly chuckle. The other guards quickly follow suit. After a beat, Jim, misreading the situation, joins in on the laughing. The other fresh fish peer down the line at Jim in terror, including Boyd, the man Jim was arrested with. The laughing subsides a bit. Blackwell then leans in close and speaks quietly to Jim. Miss Walker squints at them.
You are going to have a lot of fun in here.
Jim, still chained to the other fresh fish, bounces up and down while clapping his hands in excitement. Miss Walker spins around and steps out of the room. Blackwell begrudgingly heads off to follow her, returning to his cold and indifferent self.
Get these cons squared away.
You heard the boss. Get moving.
The fresh fish are dragged along to the next stop on the tour. Now, Jim makes his way through the intake process in a montage. Guard number 1 presses Jim's thumb into a pad of black ink before rolling it on a 10-print card in the admittance area. As he begins to ink up Jim's next finger, guard number 2 stops in the doorway.
Hey, you got today's bet?
Guard 1 walks over and hands the other a $20 bill. Guard 2 walks off with a snicker. When Guard 1 returns to Jim, he finds that Jim has made an ink Christmas tree finger painting on the print card. Jim has also painted black strips under his eyes.
Blue 42! Blue 42! Set! Pike!
As usual, Jim cracks himself up. Guard 1, on the other hand, is not as amused. He crinkles up Jim's artwork and slaps down a fresh card for Jim to try again. Now Jim steps in front of a camera and holds up his ID placard. He smiles for the mug shot as if he were taking a photo for his elementary school yearbook. Next, Jim, wearing only his underwear, steps into a large steel cage. He's then blasted with water by a guard with a fire hose. After taking a moment to adjust to the ice-cold water, Jim uses the opportunity to wash under his armpits and quench his thirst. Finally, Jim waits in line with the other fresh fish to receive his prison scrubs. He steps up to another cage, where a trustee slides a blue chambray shirt and light gray trousers through the cage slot. Jim frowns at them.
Do you have anything in green? Or red, maybe?
The trustee gives Jim a blank stare.
Don't worry, they'll be red soon.
Jim squints in confusion, but before he can ask another question, he's pulled away to keep the line moving. Later that night, the now dressed fresh fish are marched into cell block 5. It's a massive, dreary corridor with 3 tiers to a side. Each one houses hundreds of single-person cells. The inmates of cell block 5 whistle and laugh at the fresh fish, their version of a warm welcome. A guard introduces Jim to his cell, a 7 by 9 foot concrete closet, complete with a stained toilet, sink, a small desk, and a lumpy cot.
Home sweet home.
The guard pulls Jim's cell door shut with a clang. Jim grabs hold of the door and places his face between 2 bars. He smiles at the guard as he locks the cell door.
I can't wait to meet Santa.
The guard shakes his head in pity. He walks off to finish his rounds. Across the block, that same guard passes by Winston McClare's cell. Winston sits with his back against the wall by his cell door. He glares at Jim's cell as he cracks each individual finger. The next day, steam fills the large shower area where dozens of inmates lather up. Jim showers amongst them, facing the wall. He then turns around to reveal he's given himself a large white Santa beard made of soap. The heavy inmate showering next to Jim gives him a funny look. Jim points to the soap beard.
Have you seen this man?
The heavy inmate ignores Jim and turns to face the other direction. Jim shrugs and begins to wash off the soap. As he does, Winston stalks in, bare-chested, finally giving his muscles, scars, and tattoos a chance to breathe. All the inmates freeze, watching, hoping Winston doesn't pay them a visit. Luckily for them, he walks right up to Jim, who unknowingly continues with his shower. After a beat, Winston glares over his shoulder at the watching inmates. They finally get the hint and quickly scurry out to give Jim and Winston some time alone.
I've been waiting to meet you.
Oh, well, hello then. My name's Jim. What's yours?
Winston McClare. But around here, everyone just calls me the Nutcracker.
I love ballet.
Winston cracks his neck with the tilt of his head. He looks Jim over.
Not much goes on around here without me knowing about it. Heard you looking for the jolly fat man.
I am. Wait, is that one of those prison sayings I keep hearing about?
Winston glances side to side, double-checking for any unwanted listeners.
When he first showed up here, I wanted to meet him too. I was walking around acting just like you, feeling all magical inside.
So you believe?
Winston aggressively lurches at Jim, a knee-jerk reaction to being hard in prison for so long.
You got a problem with that?
No, I believe too. That's why I'm here.
Winston can't help but snicker. This little man amuses him.
Then you must be some kind of crazy man.
Jim tightens his face and squints, an attempt to match Winston's hard persona.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm springing Santa from this birdcage to save Christmas.
I can dig it. You know, I got a little girl on the outside. Ain't nobody wants their kid to wake up without gifts from Santa.
Well then, you got any idea where I can find him?
I might, but you ought to know. He ain't what you think.
Still trying to act tough, Jim rolls his eyes. Later that day, Jim follows Winston to a table in the mess hall. Nick is the only one sitting there. He's hunched over a tray of food, eating. Winston motions to Nick with his head. Jim sits down across from Nick and patiently waits. He peers around the mess hall with anxious excitement. Nick continues to eat. Of course, Jim's expecting someone that looks a little more like Santa Claus. He then turns to Winston.
Is he running late, or...?
Again, with more emphasis, Winston motions to Nick. Jim finally thinks he understands.
Oh! He already has helpers in here? Wow, he works fast.
Jim leans in close and whispers to Nick.
Excuse me, I have a message I want you to give to Santa.
Nick has yet to look up from his tray of food.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
My name is Jim Gallinack. I live at 672 Lincoln Avenue, and for Christmas, I would really love...
Winston whacks Jim on the arm to try and get him to focus.
Right, sorry. Anyway, I want you to tell Santa we're here to break him out. We're going to save Christmas.
Nick stops eating. Finally, he peers up. He gives Jim a gross, tooth-missing smile, the kind that makes your skin crawl.
Well, ain't that swell? It's nice to see you, Jim. I'm Santa Claus.
Nick offers his hand. Jim leans back in his seat. He actually looks a little disappointed. More than a little.
But you don't look like Santa.
I tend to use a little magic to change my appearance when I'm in town for, pleasure.
Pleasure?
Ray's Diner. Great cookies.
Nick winks. There's barely even a twinkle in his eye.
Well, if you have magic, then why don't you just use it to break out?
I only brought so much with me.
Then how exactly did you get into town?
I, rode on a reindeer.
Winston finally pipes in from behind Jim.
Which one?
Prancer.
And where is he?
I'm sure he flew back home after I didn't return.
Winston snaps his fingers. He thought for sure he had him.
Home, as in?
The North Pole.
Uh-huh. So, if you're here, then who's getting ready for Christmas?
Oh, the elves have been trained for something like this. I could be gone for 364 days of the year, and that place would run without a hitch. But the big night is just 3 weeks away, and I'm the only one who can deliver those presents. See, that's why I need you two to help me get out of here. The fate of every little boy and girl's Christmas depends on it. So, what do you say?
Jim peers over his shoulder at Winston. What do you think? Winston's eyes tighten. It's time to bring out the big guns. He places his meaty hands on the table and leans in close to look Nick in the eyes.
All right, big boy. What did I get for Christmas in 1934?
LeClaire, is it?
Winston nods, his stare still going strong. Nick's eyes drift upward, away from Winston's gaze, maybe as if to dig through his brain.
Let's see. Yes, I think I remember. You got, Buck Rogers' pocket pistol.
Winston grabs Nick by his shirt and yanks him up from his seat.
You lying sack of gifts. I never got no Buck Rogers pocket pistol. Not even close. You're a fake.
Well, my memory isn't what it used to be. I am over 1,000 years old, you know.
Oh, yeah? Then maybe this will help jog your memory.
Winston drags Nick across the table and puts him into a headlock. He shoves an apple into Nick's mouth.
The Nutcracker!
He raises his fist, about to pound it on Nick's head, when one of the guards standing along the wall barely makes an effort to interject.
Hey, you save that wrestling crap for the yard!
Winston groans. He finally throws Nick back into his seat.
You better grow some eyes in the back of your head, fool. Now beat it!
Nick quickly scampers off. Jim sinks into his seat. His shoulders sag as a crushing daze overcomes him.
I can't believe it. He's not really Santa.
Winston shakes his head.
Buck Rogers' pocket pistol. Come on. That's what my little brother got.
Jim's head snaps over to look at Winston. His eyes bulge.
What?
Later that night, with a bucket of water and mops, Jim and Winston mop their way down cell block 1. Their eyes rapidly glance around them, definitely up to something. Jim makes his way to Nick's dark cell. He grabs hold of the cell's bars, peering inside. Nick's silhouette can barely be seen lounging against the wall.
Hey, Santa! Santa!
Jim is suddenly startled when Pops, a frail man in his 90s, appears at the door in the cell next to Nick's. He stares uncomfortably at Jim. Nick finally speaks up, still shrouded by darkness in his own cell.
Don't worry about Pops. He believes.
Pops continues to stare. Jim's gaze drifts to his feet in shame.
You're right. I'm sorry I doubted you, Santa. I promise, ever since I saw you that night, I have never stopped believing. And I've been a very good boy since then, too.
And what about the big one? He's got quite the pool in here. We're gonna need someone like that.
Oh, well, Winston's still on the fence. He says he knows a Conn when he sees one.
Jim peers to Winston behind him, who glares back. He squeezes his mop's handle as if he were trying to strangle it to death, a warning of what could happen if Nick is conning them. Nick sighs.
You see, boys, Santa Claus is not just a person. He's a feeling. The feeling of love during the holidays for those who need it most. He's the warmth and light in a world that can be so dark, and who lives in all of us as the spirit of giving. Without Santa, there's no hope for magic or miracles. And if you don't believe, you'll never find that magic. Listen to what your heart is telling you. You'll often find that it knows best.
Nick's words radiate with the warmth and kindness of someone bearing a soulful wisdom. After a touching beat, Jim peers back to Winston for his approval. Winston replies with a reluctant, succumbing nod. Jim smiles.
Well, you can count on us.
As Jim turns back to Nick's cell, he receives a face full of tobacco smoke.
Good to hear.
Nick finally steps into the light with a cigarette dangling from his sleazy smile.
Santa! You smoke?
Nick takes a long, disgusting drag.
Yeah. Mrs. Claus don't like me smoking at the North Pole.
Pops is still staring at Jim from the cell next door.
But we're not at the North Pole, now are we, son?
Jim eyeballs both Pops and Nick before swiveling back around. He gives Winston a weak shrug.
Listen to your heart?
Winston shakes his head. This won't end well. He and Jim continue with mopping the rest of the cell block. Nick and Pops are left alone at their cell doors. Nick takes one last drag and blows 3 smoke rings into the air.
Ho, ho, ho.
The next day, Jim and Winston sit at a table in the mess hall. Nick then slides into the seat across from them with a tray of breakfast. Nick munches on a burnt sausage link, anxious with excitement.
All right, boys, where do we start?
Jim and Winston glance from side to side. Winston then slides a small spoon across the table. As Nick cocks his head in confusion, we jump into a montage of escape scenarios while Jim and Winston rattle them off. First, we see a poster depicting a sexy Mrs. Claus hanging from the wall of Nick's dimly lit cell.
Here's the plan.
The light in the cell clicks off. Nick approaches the poster and cautiously glances over his shoulder.
The prison's main sewer line runs behind your cell. You gonna dig a hole to it with this dull spoon.
Nick lifts the poster's bottom corners away from the wall to reveal a crudely dug hidden tunnel. Nick slides into the dark tunnel, letting the poster glide back down to conceal it. Moments later, Nick worms his way down a 2-foot-wide crud-coated sewer pipe. His face is wrinkled in disgust.
Once you in the pipe, ain't nothing but a simple crawl to freedom. That is if they don't flush the main line.
The sewer pipe begins to violently rattle. Nick freezes. Suddenly, a swarm of rats comes squealing down the pipe. They scrape and scamper past Nick in a hurry. What could they be running from? As the last rat hops over Nick, he looks down the pipe ahead of him.
Oh no!
Nick tries to shimmy backward as fast as he can. Back in Nick's silent cell, all is still for a beat until a geyser of blackish-brown sewage blasts through the poster from Nick's hidden tunnel. The geyser finally dies down and spits out a pair of shoes. Nick's shoes. We then cut back to Jim, Winston, and Nick in the mess hall. Nick looks to the half-eaten sausage link in his hand. With his appetite now gone, he lets a mouthful of sausage fall out onto his tray.
I deal with enough crap as it is, all right? No sewer lines.
Winston groans. As he takes the dull spoon and snaps it in half, we jump into another escape scenario. It's the middle of the night. Nick runs up to one of the prison's outer walls with a large, crudely made grappling hook coiled around his shoulder.
Oh, I have an idea! We'll sneak you out to one of the walls with the grappling hook.
Nick twirls the grappling hook around before letting it fly. It soars high over the wall and lands on the other end with a clank. Nick gives the line a firm tug. It's not going anywhere. He smirks with satisfaction and begins climbing.
All you have to do is scale the wall, and you're home free. We just have to figure out which side has the least amount of traffic.
On the opposite side of the wall, it's revealed that the grappling hook is secured to a utility van's back bumper. The van sputters to life and drives off, pulling the line along with it. Nick has only scaled a few feet up the wall when he's suddenly yanked upwards. As the grappled van speeds off, Nick is sent flying over the wall. He sails through the air and lands in an electrical power grid across the street. Sparks of electricity light up the night sky. We then cut back to Jim, Winston, and Nick, who are now in the prison woodshop. Jim has constructed a tiny makeshift grappling hook out of wood scraps and rope. Winston and Nick watch him twirl it around.
Let me ask you something, Are you nuts?
Jim and Winston are taken aback. Jim stops twirling.
I mean, I don't have my protective coat or anything. You wouldn't want me to get hurt by such a stunt, would you?
Jim shakes his head profusely. Winston considers the idea, shrugging. Nick runs a hand through his disheveled hair. We then jump into the last escape scenario. An inmate named Gimbal wheels in a garbage can and drops it off by a utility room's trash chute. He gives the can's lid 2 pats before leaving.
All right. How about this?
After a beat, the can's lid pops open to reveal Nick, covered in banana peels and coffee grinds. His eyes dart around the room.
We get one of my boys working trash to look the other way when a certain garbage can has a little extra heft to it.
With the coast clear, Nick topples out of the garbage can. He then quickly opens the trash chute and slides down it head first. Outside of the prison, Nick's body is briefly seen as the chute spits him out into a large dumpster. The dumpster's lid closes behind him.
From there, the trash chute is a one-way ticket out of here. And don't worry, garbage ain't collected till Thursday. Or is it Wednesday?
A garbage truck rumbles up to the dumpster. Its mechanical arm lifts the dumpster off the ground. Muffled thuds and swears are heard from inside the dumpster as its contents are emptied into the truck's hopper. Nick digs his way to the surface of the trash-filled hopper. He barely has a chance to catch his breath when the compactor grinds to life behind him. Nick panics, looking for an escape. The compactor slowly crushes inward, sending Nick to the opposite end. He screams in terror, and just as the compactor is about to crush him, we cut to Jim, Winston, and Nick, now seated amongst an audience of inmates in the prison's dark auditorium. An old 1920s black and white film is projected onto the back wall. Winston has just finished explaining his trash chute plan. He and Jim eagerly await Nick's response, except Nick seems to be half distracted watching the film.
Santa!
Huh?
Well, do you think it could work?
What's that?
The trash chute.
Oh, no. I was with you up until the garbage truck crushed me.
Winston and Jim exchange a puzzled look.
What garbage truck?
Listen, boys, these plans, they've all got their flaws. You see, we need to be more stealthy about it, like how I do things on Christmas Eve.
Winston leans back in his chair, folding his arms.
Yeah? Well, there ain't no way you gonna be able to just walk up out of here, that's for sure.
Nick shrugs Winston off and returns to the film. With their final idea thrown to the gutter, Jim sinks into his folding chair. Meanwhile, on screen, a criminal disguised in a tree outfit notices a group of police officers approaching. He quickly assumes a generic tree position and goes unnoticed as a group of the officers pass by. Jim sits up in his seat, curious. The criminal knocks out 3 unknowing officers as they attempt to cut down his tree outfit. Once the final officer is unconscious, the criminal scurries away safely. A slow smile curls across Jim's face. The next day, Jim, Winston, and Nick make up part of a chain gang just outside of the prison's outer gate. The 3 guards tasked with watching the inmates are occupied with their own conversation. Winston smashes a large boulder to bits with a sledgehammer. He's the only one actually doing any work.
So, you wanna sneak him out of here in some kind of disguise?
I've heard worse.
Winston glares at Nick, who leans against a sledgehammer to rest.
Oh, you don't think someone's gonna notice a giant tree walking around?
Meanwhile, Jim balances a small boulder on another slightly larger one. He looks amongst the rest of the pile for more.
We don't have to use a tree, silly. It can be anything, as long as it's large but mobile.
There's only one problem. Whatever we end up using will stick out like a sore thumb. This thing's gotta look like it's part of the prison.
A barrage of whistles and catcalls are heard off screen. Jim, Winston, and Nick look towards the commotion. They spot Warden Blackwell walking with Miss Walker along one of the yard's back fences. Nick shuffles up to the fence to admire Miss Walker from a distance. The rest of the chain gang are forced to follow.
Naughty or nice? I must check it twice.
Santa!
Nick snickers to himself. Just then, Bernard the inmate jogs up to Winston from the other side of the prison yard's fence.
Hey, Nutcracker, what you want us to report?
Tell them we want some newer movies. And add tater tots back to the menu.
What's this about?
The state's been busting Blackwell's jingle bells about all this reform business. They're looking to see what could help improve conditions around here.
Jim peers over to what he's been constructing.
Can I make a suggestion?
Winston, Nick, and Bernard follow Jim's gaze to his creation. 3 small boulders stacked to resemble a snowman. Later that day, a dozen inmates are working out and playing cards on a set of bleachers in the prison yard. The inmate Hermie spots Buddy at a bench press. He struggles to lift the bar. Winston then grabs the bar and easily places it back up onto the rack.
Hey, listen up. I want y'all to meet someone.
Winston steps aside to show Jim, who smiles at the inmates.
Jim, these are my boys.
Winston points them out as he names them.
That's Buddy. Hermie. Over there, that's Bernard. That's Gimbal. And then you already know Pops.
I love them already.
Gimbal eyeballs Jim.
What's with the misfit? Me and Jim are working a slip. We need y'all to help set it up.
Is that so? Who's the lucky guy?
Winston points to the yard's back fence, where Nick stands with another inmate. The inmate hands him a pack of cigs. Nick gives some candy in return. They both walk off without raising suspicion.
You're kidding. What bumps him to the top of the list?
He's Santa Claus.
There's a beat of silence. The inmates burst out laughing.
You better watch it. I will deck your halls.
Buddy stands from the bench press and slowly steps up to Winston.
Now wait just a minute. You're telling me the big bad pro wrestler, the Nutcracker, still believes in fairy tales?
The inmates poke fun at Winston. Jim then slides between the two of them. He glares up at Buddy.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think I saw your mama kissing Santa Claus. Yeah! Here Comes Santa Claus is probably your favorite song. I bet she's full of Christmas spirit.
The inmates all defensively react. Winston tries to hold Jim back.
Hey, Jim. Relax.
Sorry. Prison changes a man.
Fool, you only been in here 4 days.
Whatever. I just hate it when people pick on us believers.
Man, the two of yous are out of whack. That flakes are nobody. If anyone deserves to get out of here, it's Pops. Got it?
The inmates all agree. They look to Pops, who sits on the bleachers. He's whittling down a rectangular block of wood.
You know, Jim happens to be right. Prison does change a man. It forces you to take a hard look at yourself, your mistakes, and the pain you've caused to the ones you love. I've been in and out of prison my whole life, and the first thing to escape these walls will always be your hope.
The inmates take this in. It's something they can all relate to.
But you gotta keep going. You find that hope wherever you can, and that's who Nick was for me. In all my years, I can truly say I have never met a soul quite like him.
Are you saying you think he's Santa Claus too, Pops?
I'm saying it's important to me that Nick gets out of here.
The inmates consider this for a beat. Finally, Buddy turns to Jim. He looks him over one last time.
All right, we're in. But just know, we ain't doing it for you.
Jim gives Buddy a happy, understanding nod.
So, what do you need from us?
We cut to Miss Walker, waiting at the entrance to the library. She watches dozens of inmates fill out surveys at numerous tables. Buddy, Bernard, Gimble, Hermie, Pops, and the rest of the inmates exit the room. They hand Miss Walker their surveys on the way out. Outside the library, another line of inmates led by Winston, Jim, and Nick wait along the wall. They acknowledge the passing inmates with sly winks and nods. As the last one exits, Miss Walker motions for the next group to enter. Winston, Jim, Nick, and the other smug inmates trot into the room. Later that day, Blackwell sits at a desk in his office. He glances over one of the inmates' completed surveys. A pile of them is neatly stacked nearby. Miss Walker stands across the desk from Blackwell, her hands folded. He finally looks up to her.
Absolutely not.
Mr. Blackwell, need I remind you that Hillgate is already on probation? Changes will need to be made whether you like it or not.
Well, I don't see how decorating my prison is going to help.
The holidays have always been a difficult time for these men. Giving them any kind of Christmas could help lift their spirits. Something I'd say you desperately need around here.
And you think that's going to change their ways? Decriminalize them? My own father is a criminal, Miss Walker, and I can tell you from personal experience, a Conn will always be just that. It's hardwired into their very being.
Well, just be happy those are only short-term suggestions, Mr. Blackwell. They're the easiest ones to achieve. The fact of the matter is, if you don't make any attempt at improvement, you will lose this prison.
Miss Walker spins around and leaves with the last word. Blackwell watches her go with contempt. He then leers back down at the survey on his desk. It belongs to one Jim Gallinack. Later that night, Blackwell approaches Jim's cell. He's accompanied by a plump 300-pound guard named Sonny. Blackwell motions for Sonny to open the cell door. Jim's cell is meticulously decorated with makeshift Christmas ornaments. Snowflakes, Christmas trees, and angels cut from newspaper hang from the ceiling and walls. Jim stands at a calendar. He draws a small streak on it with a red marker, counting the days down till Christmas. Blackwell dawdles into Jim's cell, taking in the decorations. Jim casually turns. He's been expecting this visitor.
I see you live up to your reputation. You're quite the festive fanatic.
Jim glances around at everything, summoning his best Clint Eastwood.
What can I say? Christmas is my poison.
For most men, it's either booze, drugs, or women.
I'm not most men.
Blackwell slowly nods. He squints at Jim.
Truth be told, I was surprised when I first heard what you were in for. Why did you rob that bank?
I'm sorry. I thought we weren't allowed to ask questions here.
Sonny barges into the cell. He snags Jim by the collar and lifts him off the ground.
You think you're funny, old boy?
Now, put him down.
Sonny groans. He returns Jim to the floor. Jim fixes his collar, barely skipping a beat.
You can act tough all you like, Mr. Gallinack, but we both know you're not the criminal type. Oh, I'd say you belong more at the North Pole.
I'm happy right where I am.
Then it looks like it's your lucky day. I need this prison decorated in the next 2 weeks. I'm putting you in charge of the Christmas committee. I'll supply you with anything you might need.
Blackwell and Sonny step out of Jim's cell. Sonny locks the door behind him.
All right. Say I scratch your back. How are you gonna scratch mine?
That's not how it works, Mr. Galanak. You either do as I say, or face the consequences. Is that clear?
Jim steps up close to the door. He looks Blackwell in the eyes, swallowing his fake pride.
Crystal.
Blackwell sneers. He and Sonny finally march off. Once gone, Jim glances over to Winston at his cell. Winston leans on the door, watching. Jim throws Winston an enthusiastic thumbs up. It's go time. The next day, Jim, Winston, and Nick stand over a miniature model of the prison's cell blocks in the woodshop. The model is made from wooden sticks and other trinkets found within the shop.
Gentlemen, Operation Run Run Santa is a go. Christmas Eve is in T-minus 14 days. Let's get started.
Jim places a small object meant to represent Nick in one of the model's cells. Another montage shows the team slowly preparing for Santa's daring escape. It starts off with Nick entering the cell block with the rest of his neighbor inmates. One by one, they file into their cells for the night.
First things first, we need a way for Santa to sneak out of his cell. That I'll leave to the expert.
Nick steps into his cold cell. He turns to face the open door and takes a deep, nervous breath. He fiddles with something in his hand.
An entire cell block can be shut up by the pull of one lever, but the doors still operate with your typical lock and key. I say all we gotta do is block that lock.
All right, close them up.
A lever is pulled at the end of the cell block. The clanging of shutting doors rings throughout the corridor. Nick quickly shoves a small piece of wood into the lock hole on the side of his cell's door. The piece has been shaved down to fit the spot perfectly. Not a second later, Nick's cell door slides shut. Upon closing, the wood stopper prevents the locks from engaging, causing the door to slightly bounce back. Nick gasps, surprised. He softly slides the door shut again when footsteps approach. Nick freezes. He nervously peers through his door. A guard ambles down the cell block. He tugs on each and every cell's door, ensuring everyone is locked in for the night. Thoughts racing, Nick grabs hold of his door to take out the stopper. But it's too late for that now. Nick steps back in a panic. He looks around the cell, searching for any idea of what to do. Moments later, the guard makes his way down the cell block, inspecting the doors. He's 3 cells away from Nick. 2 cells. 1 cell. The guard reaches for Nick's door, and just as he's about to grab it, he recoils, fanning the air with his hand.
Oh, jeez! Keep it in the cell, Santa Claus!
In the cell, Nick sits on the toilet with his pants at his knees. He looks to the guard and brings up his hands like, "Little privacy here?" The guard moves along to finish off his rounds. Nick flushes the toilet, pulls up his pants, then steps back up to the door. With the coast now clear, he slides the door open, retrieves the wood stopper, then quietly slams it shut again. Nick leisurely tosses the wood stopper in the air. He smiles to himself. Next, Jim uses a giant stick to mix an off-white paste in a bucket in the wood shop. A large bag of pancake mix and a jug of glue sit nearby.
Okay, so I'm out of my cage. Then what?
You'll slip into your disguise. We'll place it just outside your cell for easy access.
Once satisfied, Jim pours the mixture into a rounded mold made from styrofoam.
Large but mobile?
And a jolly happy soul.
Meanwhile, across the room, Nick and Winston remove the hardened paste from another mold. They secure it to the base of a rounded wood frame in the shape of a snowman.
Now, what happens if I run into a little, trouble?
A large, fake top hat rests upon the snowman's head. A long, clear tube runs from the hat all the way down to the base of the snowman.
I'm already 1 step ahead of you.
As Nick and Winston continue to secure the hardened paste, Jim grabs a nearby oil container and climbs up a stool next to the snowman. He pours the oil into an opening in the top of the snowman's fake hat. Later, Jim, Winston, and Nick lean over their model of the prison's cell blocks. Jim takes the object representing Nick and demonstrates the suggested path to the main gate. He taps the object in numerous areas along the outer perimeter as if it were a board game.
Once you're disguised, you can sneak to each of these checkpoints until you reach the main gate. And now, thanks to Winston and the boys, you'll blend right in.
Nick looks up to Jim and Winston with a grin. We then cut to a shot of cell block 1, which has been beautifully decorated with colorful flowing tinsel and twinkling lights. In the center of the cell block runs a row of fake presents, Christmas trees in all shapes and sizes, and dozens of miniature snowmen, crafted to look exactly like Nick's disguise. Jim places one final mini snowman just outside Nick's cell, where a gap has been left for the final piece.
Now, I've got good news and bad news. Which do you want first?
Bad.
I don't want our focus on Santa's cell block to look suspicious, so we might have to decorate the entire prison.
Nick and Winston groan in protest.
I know, but my hands are tied. The warden's already got his eye on me.
In a series of shots, Jim, Winston, Nick, and other inmates decorate the rest of the prison.
Hold up. Didn't you say there was good news?
Yeah. We get to decorate the entire prison, duh!
The mess hall, remaining cell blocks, administration offices, solitary confinement, and the visitation room are all transformed into festive wonderlands. Later that day, Blackwell strolls down the now decorated cell block, peering in each cell he passes. Blackwell finally comes to a stop outside one of the cells. The inmate inside washes his hands at the sink.
Front and center, Boyd.
Boyd turns into view. He smirks, stepping forward to lounge on the door before Blackwell.
To what do I owe the pleasure?
You watch your tone with me, convict. I'm not your high school principal.
My apologies, sir.
Blackwell exhales through his nose. He has more pressing matters at hand.
I thought it was time we had a nice little chat. I've been wanting to ask you about your partner.
What partner?
Jim Gallinak, the man you were arrested with.
Hey man, that loon is not my partner. I work alone. Always have, always will.
So prior to your arrest, you've never seen him before?
You know, he took all the credit for our last job. My last job. I mean, months of planning. All for nothing.
Save your breath. You still belong here. And that's all that matters. But I am willing to strike a deal.
Boyd straightens up. He eyeballs Blackwell.
What kind of deal?
You keep an eye on Mr. Gallinak and anyone he associates with, and I'll make sure you're taken care of.
Yeah? Like what? Special treatment?
Bring me something useful first. Then we'll discuss the details.
Blackwell marches off, leaving Boyd to ponder his proposition. On Blackwell's way out, he nears the cell of Pops, the 90-year-old inmate next to Nick's cell. Pops stands at the door, trying to catch the attention of Blackwell as he passes.
Can I speak with you, son?
Blackwell stops for a moment, his lips pinched, but he doesn't turn. Instead, he lifts his chin and finally continues out of the cell block. Pops shuffles back to his cot in despair. The next day, Jim and Nick sit at the end of a table in the mess hall. Jim nervously bounces his leg. A couple of tables across from them sits Winston, also alone and anxious.
All right, now, let's get back on track. What's next?
Next, we have to get you through the main gate. And for that, we'll need a special key.
Lucky for us, me and Bones get along pretty well.
Bones, a very skinny guard in his 80s, slowly makes his way down the row of tables. A giant ring of keys jingles at his hip. Just as Bones is lined up with Jim's table, Winston jumps out of his seat and stops him in a friendly conversation.
Hey, how you doing, man? How's the grandkids?
With Bones now distracted, Jim begins looking for the key, but his neck cranes forward. He's met by dozens of keys on the giant key ring. Jim frantically sifts through them, looking up to Winston for confirmation on which is the right one. Still engaged in conversation with Bones, Winston twitches his head to try and direct them to the correct key. Failing to understand Winston's directions, Nick points to numerous incorrect keys, only making matters worse. After a fumbling moment, Jim finally finds the right one. He carefully presses both sides of the key into his dried-out mashed potatoes to create a makeshift mold.
Yeah? Cool, man, cool. Well, hey, I'll catch you later.
Winston abruptly walks off, leaving Bones to continue on his way, none the wiser. Back in the woodshop, Jim files down a thin piece of wood. Once satisfied, he holds it up, revealing one end of the piece has been shaped into a simple key. Jim then walks over to the snowman disguise and inserts the key into an opening at the bottom of the snowman's head. The other end of the key has been shaped to look like a tobacco smoking pipe. Later that night, the old guard, Bones, gingerly patrols the shadow-stricken cell block when a short, quiet whistle calls him over to one of the cells.
That sounds good and all, but what about the Sallyport guard? They've got someone in there 24/7.
Bones approaches Winston, who stands at the door. Winston cautiously glances up and down the cell block. Finally, he hands Bones a wrapped Christmas present through the door's bars. Some cash is also included in the handoff. Bones takes the present and bribe with a sly nod. He walks off.
They got a young blood named Simmons manning the ship, and I got it just the thing to keep him occupied. Right out of my personal library.
With the present under his arm, Bones passes through the main gate. He locks it back up with that key Jim copied. Sitting in the Sallyport booth behind a 3-paneled glass barrier is Simmons, the fresh-faced guard. He attempts to balance a pencil on the bridge of his nose when Bones knocks on the glass. He holds up the present to show Simmons. Moments later, Simmons now has the present. He checks the tag. To Simmons, from Santa Claus. He curiously rips off the wrapping paper. His boyish eyes light up. It's a small stack of adult magazines. The covers feature cocktail-sipping women dressed in skimpy lingerie.
Trust me, those fine ladies will keep them busy for a long time. But you didn't hear that from me.
Hey, come on. I invented the naughty list.
Simmons is pleasantly surprised. The next day, Jim sits behind a piano playing the melody for Jingle Bell Rock in the prison chapel. Singing along is a choir of inmates. Nick and Winston joyfully sing amongst them.
And for the final star on top, we're going to start a caroling group.
Caroling? What's that have to do with the escape?
Oh, nothing. It's just a tradition of mine. Sure, we may be in prison, but that doesn't mean we can't still enjoy the holidays.
Believe it or not, the group doesn't sound half bad. Everyone is genuinely caught up in the music, singing like no one's listening. Over by the entrance, Blackwell stands watching at the doorway. He too has unintentionally been infected by the Christmas bug. A hint of a smile can even be seen. Miss Walker joins Blackwell in the doorway. He doesn't notice her at first, and for a brief, peaceful moment, the two of them admire the childlike inmates and joyful music. Miss Walker then looks over to Blackwell.
Looks like spirits have been lifted.
Blackwell's posture hardens, and his slight smile fades. Back to business. He clears his throat.
They're just happy they're not busting rocks out in the snow.
I don't know. I think you're really coming around.
Don't be mistaken, Miss Walker. Once a con, always a con.
Miss Walker glowers at Blackwell, finally fed up with his cynical attitude.
Mr. Blackwell, you have to stop treating these inmates as if they're your father. You cannot punish them for his negligence.
Well, the last time I checked, this was still my prison.
For now.
Blackwell grimaces. He spins around and tries to storm away, but he almost runs over Hermie the inmate. Hermie whistles the same song while mopping the floor behind him, causing even more aggravation. Change is unmistakably in the air. Later, the prison woodshop is littered with leftover decoration supplies and scraps. A tall, round figure covered by a giant sheet looms in the back corner. Once again, Jim, Nick, and Winston stand over their prison model. More objects have been added to the model to represent other vital items and checkpoints. It looks like they've been simulating the escape for days now.
Well, boys, why don't we wrap this up and put a bow on it?
All right. So once you're past the Sally port, you'll have a clear shot to the warden's office.
Jim takes the object representing Nick and places it in the warden's office. Nick's brow furrows. He studies the model for answers to his arising confusion.
Wait a minute now. Back up. You lost me. Shouldn't I be working my way up to the front exit?
Nope.
Then what's in the warden's office?
Jim and Winston exchanged an amused look. Is he serious?
Well, we thought it was pretty obvious. You're escaping through the chimney.
I'm sorry. The what?
The chimney? Office got a fireplace.
Isn't it genius, Santa? It's just like how you do things on Christmas Eve.
Nick grimaces with a painful look. He's brimming with anger.
You're telling me we're throwing away weeks' worth of meticulous planning and execution by ending it all with that chimney getaway?
Yes! They'll never suspect it!
Nick's lips rapidly move as he tries to find the right words.
What am I supposed to do once I'm on the roof? Huh? Did you think about that?
I already sent a letter to the North Pole. I explained the entire plan so the elves will know when and where to pick you up.
Oh, and you really expect the Postal Service to deliver that on time? Okay.
Let me ask you something. How many days till Christmas Eve?
Nick rolls his eyes.
Well, I don't know, but a week?
Christmas Eve is in 3 days, and from the looks of things, this is the best and only plan we got. My little girl is counting on you, Mad. You're gonna have to make it work.
Just then, a guard steps into the woodshop, bringing an end to the conversation.
Hey, Galanak, you've got visitors.
Oh, goody! That completes my prison bingo card.
The guard escorts Jim out of the woodshop. As Nick watches Jim skip away, he reluctantly shakes his head, questioning what he's gotten himself into. Moments later, the visitation room is decorated with looping tinsel, fake snowfall, and beautiful ornaments, all courtesy of the escape plan. Jim takes a seat in a small visitation booth. Crammed behind the glass on the opposite side is Jim's entire extended family. Jim puts the booth's phone up to his ear. He speaks to Mrs. Galanak first, who currently sits in the opposite chair.
Hey guys, thanks for coming.
My little boy!
Mrs. Galanak becomes a sobbing mess.
Marcia, you said you wouldn't cry.
Mr. Galanak steals the phone and nudges her out of the seat.
What did I tell you, huh? I told you one of these days this crazy obsession would land you in big trouble. I mean, look at yourself. It's embarrassing.
Jim's Aunt Missy leans in close. She cradles a Bible.
Just pathetic.
Aunt Missy!
Dad, give me the phone. Give it to me.
Mr. Galanak scoffs at Jim before giving the seat over to Tyler.
Listen, Jim. We've hired one of the best lawyers in Chicago to help you get out of there.
You did what?
She thinks there's a good chance we can spin this thing to convince the courts you actually prevented that robbery. On purpose.
No, you can't do that!
Sure she can. She's already filed for an appeal.
No, Tyler! You have to tell her to stop!
Tyler speaks away from the phone to the group of family behind him.
Oh, he's been in too long.
Mrs. Galanak explodes into even more tears. Jim's nephew Michael then squeezes his way to the front of the group.
Way to go, Jim. You ruined everything.
Now Mr. Galanak shouts to be heard through the phone.
Hey, you tell him he's lucky we found someone that didn't laugh us out of the room when they heard what he's really in there for. Breaking out Santa Claus.
Dad!
Guys. I got this.
Tyler finally turns back to Jim with a warm look.
Come on, Jimbo. This family needs you, buddy. I need you.
Jim gets caught up in the notion. His face softens, longing for the comfort of his loving family.
Really?
Of course. If you don't come home, then who's gonna make the pies?
Numerous family members pipe in with their own selfish concerns, like who's gonna buy my gifts? Who's going to throw the Christmas party? And what about dinner with all the trimmings? Jim deflates from disappointment, his family's true intentions finally revealed.
Really?
What?
I do not want out of here. I'm on a mission!
Fine, be that way.
Tyler hangs up the phone and stands. He speaks to the family behind him while looking down on Jim.
Come on, gang. Looks like Jim really does ruin everything.
Jim's family shuffles out of the room in a huff. Once gone, it's revealed that Jim's niece Lisa is the only one left. She climbs up onto the seat and grabs the phone.
Uncle Jim, is Santa really in there?
Yes!
Will he be out before Christmas?
I promise.
What if you get put on the naughty list?
Well, I don't know.
There's a concerned beat as Jim bites the inside of his cheek. He then gives Lisa a hesitant smile.
Oh, I'm sure I'll be fine. But that's why I need to stay. You understand, right?
Lisa stands up onto the seat of the chair. She slams the phone back on the wall's receiver.
I hope you rot in there for the rest of your life, Uncle Jim.
Lisa smirks and winks at Jim. She then hops off the chair to catch up with the others. Jim smiles. The other inmates and guards around him stare. Damn, that's cold. Later that night, Nick lies on his cot. He toys with the small wood stopper made for his cell door. After a beat, Pops whispers from the cell next door.
Are you still awake in there, Nick? Yeah, Pops, I'm awake. Come on over here. I got something for you.
Pops passes a small rectangular object to Nick through their cell doors. It's carefully wrapped in newspaper.
What's this? It's, for my son. I made a lot of mistakes in my life, Nick. And I'm ashamed to admit that forced him to grow up just a little too soon. The warden won't let me get through to my boy, and I'm not sure how much fight I have left. Now, I may not deserve it, but it would mean the world to me if you could deliver that when you get out of here.
Nick lets out a remorseful sigh.
Rest easy, my friend. I'll add him to my route. You're a saint, Nick. That's what they call me.
Nick hides the wrapped gift and wood stopper under his mattress. Next door, Pops gingerly crawls onto his cot. He pulls up the covers for a long winter's nap. Later, Blackwell sleeps quietly in his lonely bed. He's suddenly awoken when the phone on his nightstand rings. Blackwell reaches over and answers it, half asleep.
Yeah.
Mr. Blackwell, it's Alan from the coroner's office. I regret to inform you that one of your inmates has passed.
Blackwell's eyes open. He stares at the ceiling.
Who was it?
It was Pops, sir.
There's a beat of silence. Finally, without saying a single word, Blackwell returns the phone to its receiver. He sits up and swings his legs off the bed. He remains there for a moment, his head sagging. The next day, Blackwell sits at his desk in his office. He shuffles through papers as if it were just another day at Hillgate. There's a knock at the door. Miss Walker slips into the office. Blackwell has yet to look up from his work.
Miss Walker, what can I do for you?
I wanted to deliver the good news personally.
Miss Walker sets a document down on Blackwell's desk.
I've decided to remove Hillgate from probation. You've impressed quite a few people downstate. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Miss Walker makes her way to the door. Before leaving, she turns back to Blackwell.
If it means anything, I just wanted to let you know I'm sorry.
Blackwell gives her a sheepish nod. Miss Walker finally exits the office. As she does, a guard then steps in.
My God, it's not a revolving door.
Sorry, sir. There's an inmate who'd like to see you. He claims to have information about last night.
Well, bring him in.
The guard turns around and opens the door. Another guard ushers in the bank robber Boyd. He steps up to Blackwell's desk with a smirk. Moments later, Blackwell marches down cell block 1 with hell to pay. He's flanked by a handful of guards. They come to a stop outside Nick's cell, and Blackwell motions for the door to be opened. Nick stands up from his cot as 2 guards step inside.
Face the wall!
Nick complies. Blackwell watches him closely from outside as the remaining guards toss the cell. They start with the shelves and small desk, scattering items all over the place. Meanwhile, Nick nervously glances down at his mattress. Blackwell notices this. He snaps his fingers at the guards, pointing them to the cot. The guards strip the mattress of its pillow and sheets. Finally, they lift the mattress from its frame. And everyone freezes. One of the guards slowly leans down and picks up something out of frame. Blackwell now steps into the cell. He takes the object from the guard and studies it for a beat. Finally, he holds it up to reveal the cell door's wood stopper.
And what might this be?
Looks like some kind of jam.
Blackwell begins to slowly exit the cell, gears turning. Once he reaches the cell door, he stops. Then, Blackwell slides the wood stopper into the lock hole on the side of the cell's door. It fits with a perfect thump. He glances back at Nick with a sneer.
You just won yourself an all-expense-paid trip to the hole, Rigoletto. Get him out of here.
The guards and Blackwell escort Nick out of the cell block. On his way out, Blackwell pauses at Pops's cell. The door has been left open, and all of Pops's belongings have been cleared out. Blackwell longingly stares into the empty cell. Numerous items have been placed on Pops's cot in the form of a memorial. There's a beautifully illustrated portrait of Pops, hand-picked flowers, a pack of cigarettes, handwritten goodbye letters, and a folded piece of paper that reads, "Rest in peace, Pops, 1875 to 1965. Blackwell's breathing wavers for a beat. Finally, he continues out of the cell block. Moments later, Nick is led to solitary confinement and tossed into the hole. He stumbles to the cold floor. Even with the door open, the stone room seems dark and empty. Blackwell steps into the doorway. He leers down upon Nick.
Last chance. I know the old man gave you something. Tell me what it was.
Nick sits up, brushing himself off.
The only thing given that night was forgiveness.
Blackwell's nostrils flare in fury. He slams the cell door shut. The last trace of light is squeezed out of the room. Later that night, Blackwell strolls down cell block 5. He's alone this time. The resident inmates settle in for the night. Blackwell then stops outside Jim's cell in a stiff stance. Jim lies belly down on his cot, drawing a Christmas scene in a notebook. He looks like a teenage girl writing in her diary. Jim peers up at Blackwell.
Why, hello, Mr. Warden!
Blackwell simply sets Nick's wood stopper in the small cuff port of Jim's cell door. Jim's eyes widen. His bulletproof, giddy expression finally breaks.
I'm going to make this very clear. You either tell me everything you, the brute, and your not-so-jolly friend have been planning, or all three of you will be spending the new year in solitary confinement.
Jim steps up to the cell door. He hangs on the door's bars, pleading.
Please, Mr. Blackwell, you have to let him out!
Oh, I have to, huh? And why is that? Because he's Santa Claus?
Yes, he is! And if he doesn't deliver presents on Christmas Eve, every little boy and girl around the world will stop believing in him!
Oh, for God's sake. Whatever he said to convince you to help break him out, it was a lie. His name is Nicholas Rigoletto, the famous con man of Chicago. His Santa story was a last-ditch effort to avoid serving time. Lucky for him, someone was foolish enough to fall for it.
Jim's face tightens.
I'm not the only one who believes.
Blackwell shakes his head.
I pity you. You're not a grown man. You're a naive child, desperate to believe in whatever helps you sleep at night. I wish I could think back to when I was the same way, but I grew up a long time ago.
Jim's eyes brim with tears.
Maybe that's your problem.
The longer you spend believing in a fairy tale, the more hurt you'll be when it never comes true. Every one of us puts hope in a Santa Claus, Mr. Galanak, but they all end up just the same. A disappointment.
There's a beat of silence between the two of them. Finally, Blackwell stomps away. His prominent footsteps echo in the tension-filled cell block.
All right, lights out.
The cell block lights bump off in sequence. Silence soon returns. Winston sits on his cot with his back against the wall.
You okay, Jim?
Jim doesn't answer. He curls up onto his cot, hugging his knees. The only thing the cell block can hear is Jim's quiet sniffles.
Hey, don't worry, man. We'll get him out. I don't know how, but we'll get him out.
The warden's right. Maybe it's time for me to grow up.
Don't say that. You've come this far. You can't let up now. You hear me?
There's no answer. It's silent again, aside from Jim's sniffles. Winston lets out a low sigh. He rests his head against the wall behind him. After a silent beat, Gimbal then whispers from his cell.
Jim, before you were here, we ain't never even had so much as a wreath hung up for Christmas. Now look at this place.
Now Hermes speaks up. He smiles.
Yeah, it sure is nice. Hanging decorations, hearing Christmas music through the halls. I haven't felt like this since I was a kid.
The cell block's inmates all quietly chuckle and agree, but Jim is still obviously hurt from Blackwell's lecture.
Well, I'm sorry I turned you into me.
Listen, you've shown us how to live through the eyes of a child again. That's called hope. Just like Pop said, hope for a fresh start or a second chance. Hope for a better tomorrow.
You've shown us that as long as you believe, anything can happen.
It's quiet again. Each and every inmate privately reflects on the ways Jim has changed them. Winston stands from his cot and looks towards Jim's cell from his door.
Don't you see, Jim? Santa Claus just ain't a person. He's a feeling.
Jim finally sits up on his cot. He wipes his nose with his sleeve.
Do you really still believe that?
Damn right. You gotta listen to your heart, remember? Even in your darkest hour of doubt and defeat, it'll always know what's best.
Jim stands to meet Winston at his own cell door.
Thanks, Winston. You boys are the best incarcerated family a guy could ever have.
Right back at you, brother.
Jim smiles.
All right, Operation Run Run Santa is back on track. Let's save Christmas, shall we?
The inmates of Cell Block 5 can't help but cheer with excitement and victory, but they're quickly silenced by the night guard.
What the hell is going on over there? I said lights out!
The next day, the elusive, tall, round figure covered by a sheet still rests in the corner of the prison woodshop. Jim grabs the sheet and yanks it off, finally revealing the massive Frosty the Snowman disguise. Everything about it is perfect. The fake top hat, the wood tobacco pipe, a long red scarf, and the large but sturdy snow-white body. It even has arms for mobility. Winston and Jim stare up at Frosty with a sense of dread.
All right, time to dig Santa out of that hole. And we both know I ain't gonna fit in that thing.
Jim rubs the back of his neck.
I don't know, Winston. I don't think I have it in me.
Sometimes, Jim, I found that you gotta do a little bad to do a lot of good.
Jim looks up to Winston.
Is that how you ended up in here?
Winston nods.
My little girl needed surgery. You know, it was life or death, but I didn't have the cash. So, I did what I had to do. I made more money in 5 minutes than I would have from 5 years of wrestling.
Jim takes this in. He puts a hand on Winston's shoulder.
You're right. Screw the naughty list. I can still save Christmas for everyone else, including your daughter.
And hey, don't worry. Me and the boys got your back if you run into trouble. Been sitting on something for a while now, actually.
Jim collects himself with a slow exhale. He then gives Winston a departing salute. It's been an honor. Winston salutes back, then turns around and stands in front of Frosty to give Jim some cover. Jim quickly disappears behind the disguise to get inside it. At the front of the room, one of the guards peers at a clock on the wall.
Chow time, ladies. Pack it up.
Winston and the other inmates quickly clean up and head out. The room is cleared, while Frosty is left alone in the corner. Later, Blackwell speaks with a dozen guards along the back wall of the mess hall. Over in the food line, Winston waits to get his lunch. The cook inmates serving the food trade knowing glances with him. Winston then makes his way to a table. He scans the room, sharing conniving nods with nearly every inmate he passes. Winston finally takes a seat next to Boyd. Aside from him, the mess hall is a sea of smirking inmates. Something is definitely afoot, and everyone is in on it. Back in the woodshop, Frosty's corner is now empty. He's nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, 2 guards stroll down the decorated cell block 4 when one of the guards slips. He barely catches himself. Both guards look down to see a long trail of oil at their feet. The oil trickles its way through the cutoff between cell blocks. The cutoff's gate hangs wide open. The guards follow the trail into the neighboring cell block. At the end of the oil trail stands Frosty, frozen at another cutoff across the cell block. His back faces the guards. The cautious guards approach the giant snowman. As they do, they whistle to the gun gallery guards at the end of the cell block. They signal to them. When the 2 guards turn back to Frosty, they're startled. Frosty is now facing them. One of the guards pulls out his baton. He cautiously inches closer, baton out, about to poke Frosty, when Frosty suddenly grabs the guard's wrist and pushes him back. The cell block's inmates all cheer Frosty on. The other guard backs away in shock. Frosty stomps towards him. He grabs the guard by his shoulders and headbutts him. Then, one of the gun gallery guards squeezes off a shot. It hits Frosty, but he casually turns to look up at the gun gallery. After a surprised beat, both gun gallery guards open fire. Frosty staggers back. The gun gallery guards empty their clips. They gape at Frosty, who remains standing. His pancake mix and glue outer shell compound have absorbed the barrage of bullets. Frosty finally darts off through the next cutoff. The gun gallery guards are left with their jaws on the floor. One of the guards points to the other.
Sound the alarm!
Meanwhile, a piercing alarm rings throughout the mess hall. The inmates, guards, and Blackwell look up with a start. A guard's voice then squawks through the PA system.
Attention! There's a giant snowman loose in the west wing. We've got guards down. I repeat, guards down.
Blackwell's head flicks back over to the inmates. He quickly studies them. He finally locks eyes with Winston, who stares back with a smirk. Blackwell's face tightens. The lack of Jim's attendance confirms his suspicions.
It's Galanak. He's headed for solitary.
Blackwell rushes for the mess hall exit. His entourage of guards follows close behind. Back at Winston, he slowly stands from his seat, chest out.
Let's dance, boys.
The mess hall explodes into a roaring riot. Inmates leap onto tables. Trays are used as weapons. Even engulfed napkins soar through the air. Winston grabs his tray and smashes it across Boyd's head, who is still eating next to him. Over by the exit, a mosh pit of brawling inmates quickly crowds the doors. Blackwell and the guards skid to a stop just feet away from their escape. The ever-growing riot forces them to retreat.
Oh, protect me! Protect me!
The guards enclose themselves in front of Blackwell. They cower to the wall behind them, keeping a safe distance from the inmates. The riot is absolute mayhem. Meanwhile, Frosty now approaches another cutoff in cell block 2.
There he is! Get him!
Frosty turns to look. At the end of the cell block, a handful of guards race towards him. Frosty quickly uses his tobacco pipe key to unlock the cutoff gate. He careens into the next cell block. As Frosty rounds the corner, he reaches up and pushes the button nose on his head. A hole in Frosty's bottom spews out gallons of thick, dark oil. It quickly covers the floor as Frosty continues down the cell block. The group of guards now stream through. They too round the corner, right into the oil. One by one, each guard falls to their arse. A traffic jam forms as they struggle to stand. Moments later, Frosty rushes into the solitary confinement hallway. He skids to a halt. At the end of the hallway is the 300-pound guard. He peers down at his uniform's name tag. It reads, Sunny. He looks back up to Frosty with a snicker from the irony.
The sun was hot that day.
I hope you brought a shovel, because I'm gonna beat the living snow out of you.
Oh, you don't want to mess with the magic in this hat.
Sunny charges at Frosty. Frosty does the same. As the two giants collide, Frosty hits Sunny with a powerful belly bump. Sunny flops to his back and skids across the floor. He then grasps for a miniature Christmas tree decoration along the wall. Frosty doesn't notice as he stands over him.
How do you like that fairy tale?
Sunny swings the Christmas tree and whips Frosty across the face. Frosty stumbles back, gripping the wall. Sunny then ditches the tree and rushes Frosty. He delivers blow after blow to Frosty's gut, but the punches barely make a dent. Sunny grimaces. He then rocks Frosty's face with a right hook. The snowman's head spins around 180 degrees. He reaches outward, unable to see. Flying blind, Frosty drives Sunny backward. They both crash into numerous decorations along the opposite wall. Back in the mess hall, the riot continues. Blackwell and the guards remain glued to the wall, but the inmates don't seem to be concerned with them. Blackwell's brow furrows. He watches the riot more closely. Hermie places a hand on Buddy's head and pounds it. Buddy reels in shock and pain. Winston dives off a table. He elbow drops Bernard, who already lies rolling on the ground. Gimbal has another inmate pinned to the ground as well. He's got the inmate's leg pulled up to his chest. The entire riot consists of over-dramatic wrestling moves. None of it is actually real. Blackwell straightens up, his fight or flight fading.
What should we do, sir?
It's an act. They are all in on it.
What?
Come on, we're getting out of here.
Blackwell leads the group of guards to the mess hall exit. He dodges flying trays, leaps over crawling inmates, and shoves anyone that gets in his way. Blackwell and the guards finally reach the exit. Blackwell pushes through the doors.
Wait, what about the prisoners?
Stay here and get them in line. I'll take care of Galanak.
Blackwell races towards solitary confinement. The nervous guards swivel back around. The riot has completely stopped. The inmates innocently grin at them. Meanwhile, Frosty and Sunny stagger to their feet from the pile of crushed decorations. Sunny grabs Frosty and drags him through the remaining decorations along the wall. With his head still on backward, Frosty throws out his hands to diminish the impacts. Sunny then hurls Frosty to the floor. With a break in the action, Frosty quickly spins his head back around. Frosty looks to the ground around him. He grabs two large candy cane decorations and jumps to his feet. He hooks them around his wrists and twirls them like nunchucks. He advances on Sunny. Sunny steps back, unable to find an opening in the blur of red and white. Frosty extends one of his spinning candy canes. It dazes him. Sunny quickly shakes it off, but Frosty extends the other candy cane. Sunny struggles to find his footing. He sways back and forth. Frosty now grips one of the candy canes like a baseball bat. Time to finish this. He delivers a home run to the side of Sunny's head. Sunny finally tips over.
Don't you cry. I'll be back again someday.
Sunny's solitary confinement keys lie on the floor from the scuffle. Frosty snatches them up. Moments later, the solitary confinement cell door unlocks. Light pours into the dark room as the door opens. Nick shields his eyes from the blinding light. Frosty's silhouette stands triumphantly in the doorway. Outside, Blackwell finally storms into the hallway. He's met by the aftermath of Frosty and Sunny's battle. Sunny lies unconscious on the floor, hog-tied with Frosty's red scarf. Blackwell steps over Sunny and peers into Nick's cell. It's empty. Frosty, Nick, or Jim are nowhere to be seen. Blackwell pounds the cell door.
Ah, damn it!
The handful of guards covered in oil now scramble in, finally joining the party. They're out of breath.
We lost him, sir.
What the hell happened to you?
Frosty had the runs.
We have eyes on the snowman. He's heading for the administration building.
With no time to spare, Blackwell tries to shoo the oiled guards along.
Go! Go!
Blackwell and the oiled guards scurry out. The hallway is left empty. It's still for a beat. Then, the lid to one of the large crushed presents along the wall pops open. Jim peers out. With the coast clear, Jim stumbles out of the present. He runs off in the opposite direction. Meanwhile, Simmons sits reclined with his back to the 3-paneled glass barrier in the Sally Port booth. He ogles at one of the adult magazines Winston gifted him. Behind Simmons, the large white shape of Frosty appears at the main gate. Frosty quickly unlocks the gate with his tobacco pipe key and slips into the Sally Port. Frosty freezes at the sight of Simmons in the booth, but Simmons just flips to the next page in his magazine. He rotates it, distracted by a centerfold. Frosty finally continues on, tiptoeing through the administration offices. Inside Blackwell's office, the door is locked and closed until Frosty charges through it. Once inside, Frosty rocks to a stop. The now bumped and bruised disguise twitches and jerks. Finally, Nick exits the suit from behind it like a snake shedding its skin. His eyes scour the room. He first surveys the fireplace, the original plan's intended escape. But then his gaze darts to a window across the office. Nick ponders for a moment before looking back at the fireplace. He bites the bottom of his lip with uncertainty. Back in the Sally Port, the main gate still hangs wide open from Frosty's entrance. Blackwell and the oiled guards speed through it. Blackwell points down to the administration offices.
I want every office and exit checked, then rechecked!
A couple of the oiled guards trot off to secure the building. A few guards hang back with Blackwell. Simmons still lounges in the Sally Port booth with his magazine. Blackwell beats on the glass barrier, scaring Simmons out of his seat.
Where did the snowman go?
Huh? The what?
Suddenly, a sharp crash of breaking glass is heard from Blackwell's office. Blackwell and the remaining oiled guards rush to investigate. Blackwell appears in the broken doorway. He steps into the room, shoving the abandoned Frosty disguise in anger. The oiled guards rush in after. They peer over Blackwell's shoulder. Across the room, the window Nick was eyeballing has been shattered. Broken glass lies on the floor beneath it. But at the fireplace shield has also been knocked over.
Santa went up the chimney!
Blackwell steals the oiled guard's baton and whacks him with it repeatedly.
He's not Santa, you idiot! He went out the window! I want every able-bodied man out there searching the grounds!
The oiled guards hurry off to start the search. Later that day, the tranquil sun begins to set outside of Hillgate Penitentiary. Guards and state troopers with search dogs scour the prison grounds. The guard towers are also on high alert. Large beams of light play across every inch of the prison. Everyone is still scrambling to find Nick. Blackwell stands in his office. He's framed in the broken window. He glares at a chair that lies in a pile of glass on the ground outside. His face is plastered with defeated rage when a timid guard steps up behind him.
No luck yet, sir, but we'll keep looking.
It's been hours. He's in the wind.
Well, you'll be happy to know we did find Galanac.
Blackwell looks to the guard, as if to say, I'm going to enjoy this.
Good.
Later that night, every inmate from the riot is handcuffed in a line in cell block 5. An increased amount of guards escort them back to their cells. The inmates couldn't care less. They beam with carefree happiness. Blackwell then storms into the cell block. He quickly approaches Jim, who's now casually included in the line of inmates. Blackwell looks to the guards.
Where did you find him?
He was with the others when we started rounding them up.
Blackwell scoffs in contempt. Of course he was.
Well, congratulations, Mr. Galanak. You wanted to be a real criminal. Now you've done it.
Jim puts on a show of artificial innocence.
I don't know what you're talking about.
The offense of assisting an escape will earn you an additional 7 years of dead time.
Jim smiles at Blackwell. It's a fulfilled smile.
Don't worry, Mr. Blackwell. Christmas is just around the corner. Then you'll see.
Oh, yes. I hope you're ready too, because that disappointment I mentioned is about to knock you on your ass.
Jim shrugs. After a beat, Blackwell swivels to the guards on his way out.
Lock him up. I'll deal with him once we're out of this mess.
Jim is locked back into his cell. He lies down on the cot, resting his hands behind his head. He takes in a deep, accomplished breath. We did it. The next day, Jim, Winston, and the rest of the inmates enjoy their breakfast on the morning of Christmas Eve. The mess hall is bustling with liveliness and cheer. Blackwell then glides into the room. He too looks joyful. He walks towards Jim and Winston's table at a relaxed pace.
Hey, look at that! Mr. Blackwell found his Christmas spirit!
Oh, indeed. Christmas Eve is upon us, and there's spirit in the air.
I knew you'd come around.
Mm-hmm. Plus, I saw something on the news that just made my morning.
Blackwell reaches up to a small TV secured to the side of a support beam. He clicks it on. The television's picture fades into view. Everyone leans in to get a good look. A live black and white news broadcast plays. A newscaster covers a developing story.
Again, if you're just now joining us, wanted con man Nicholas Rigoletto was finally apprehended early this morning as he attempted to flee the state. And with the recent discovery of the Rigoletto crime family's tax evasion, there's a very good chance Nicholas will be staying put behind bars. Stay tuned for updates as this story develops.
Halfway through the broadcast, the picture cuts to shaky camera footage of a gangly, disheveled man hurriedly running from a band of police officers. The footage isn't the clearest, but the man looks very similar to Nick. One of the officers catches up to Nicholas and tackles him to the ground. Nicholas pleads as he's slapped into handcuffs.
No. Hey. You got the front guy.
Blackwell clicks the TV off. He's seen enough, and so has the rest of the mess hall. He sneers directly at Jim.
Looks like everyone will be home for Christmas.
Blackwell steps away with his chin raised high. The inmates' eyes drift to one another. Just like that, their spirits have been killed. Later that night, every last present, twinkling light, and ornament has been stripped away from cell block 5. It has returned to a cold, dreary corridor. Numerous guards finish tearing down the remaining decorations. They head out for the night.
Lights out! See you in the morning, ladies.
The cell block lights bump off. Darkness makes its return. There's a beat as the gloomy inmates sit in wallow. In Gimble's cell, Gimble toys with a harmonica. Finally, he starts to play. Silent night begins to swell from his cell. It creeps throughout the cell block, visiting numerous inmates in their own cells. Buddy, Bernard, and Hermie pensively sit. The haunting melody possesses them. It's now carried to Winston. He slumps into his cot. His head hangs low. Winston peers out of his cell with a loose jaw. He sighs in defeat and slowly lies down for the night. At last, the somber carol befalls upon Jim's cell. Jim lies awake on his side. His face betrays blank features, his eyes dull. After a beat, they finally sink closed. The next morning, Jim now lies asleep on his other side, facing the wall. He slowly blinks awake, his eyes still empty. He exhales through his nose with a heavy breath. Reluctant to start the day, Jim rolls onto his back. He stares at the ceiling with an unfocused gaze when something on his cell door draws his eye. Jim tilts his head back to look. Rows of genuine pine garland are draped outside the bars. The garland sparkles, intertwined with fairy lights. Jim rocks out of bed in bewilderment. He slowly steps to his cell's door. He grabs onto the bars and peers out. Cell Block 5 has been magically transformed to look like the legendary, awe-inspiring North Pole. A long, wondrous train steams across a winding track. Beautiful handmade ornaments in all shapes and sizes dangle from the tiers. Twinkling pine garland runs along every handrail and cell door. A unique stocking hangs outside each and every inmate's cell. They're filled to the brim with goodies. Inside each cell, a miniature pine tree with its own tiny decorations rests in the corner. Below each tree waits a handful of charmingly wrapped presents. The all-out Santaland is a child's dream come true. The magic in Jim's eyes sparks back to life. A wide, silly grin falls across his face like the first kid awake on Christmas morning.
Winston, everyone, wake up! It's Christmas!
Winston and the rest of the inmates stir out of bed. They too are wonderstruck at the picturesque scene. Everyone beams with joy. Meanwhile, Blackwell arrives for the day. He passes through the open doorway into his office. Blackwell hangs his snow-speckled coat on a coat rack. He then turns for his desk, but something causes him to pause. A small, rectangular object wrapped in newspaper sits soundly on the desk. It's the gift Pops gave to Nick. Taken by surprise, Blackwell grabs the gift and inspects it for a moment. He then slowly tears off the newspaper. His stern face suddenly softens in astonishment. The gift is a weathered black and white photo encased in a beautifully hand-carved wood frame. The photo features a much younger Pops and even younger Blackwell embracing each other outside of a house on a porch. Tucked in the frame is a small handwritten note that reads, "I love you, James. From Dad." Blackwell's eyes become glossy. He runs his thumb along the intricate carvings within the outer frame. A loving warmth overcomes Blackwell. He carefully sets the frame down on the corner of his desk as its new home. Blackwell smiles, and as a single tear begins to roll down his cheek, a guard appears in the doorway. Blackwell quickly looks up to him. The guard just stands there with shock in his wide eyes.
What is it?
Back in Cell Block 5, the inmates excitedly tear open the presents from under their trees. The numerous gifts include items such as slippers, socks, thick blankets, shampoo, snacks, and books. The kind of stuff an average person would take for granted. One of Winston's gifts is a cute, huggable teddy bear. Winston hugs the bear with an aggressive amount of love. Jim watches the giddy inmates from his cell. As he smiles and revels along with them, sleigh bells softly jingle behind him. Jim turns to look. Resting in the branches of his own cell's Christmas tree is a letter. Golden dust sprinkles off the letter as if it were just delivered. Jim's name is written on the front, in beautiful calligraphy. Just then, a storm of racing footsteps and shouting guards approaches. Blackwell rushes in with the rest of the guards. They crawl to a stop, gawking at the fairy tale cell block in a huff. Jim steps up to his cell door.
How is this?
It was Santa, Mr. Blackwell. It was him all along.
There's quite a bit of contraband, sir. What would you like us to do?
Still in shock, Blackwell struggles with an internal battle. Then, like a cherry on top, it starts to snow. Silence falls upon everyone as they peer up in utter disbelief. The snow magically manifests from the ceiling. It's almost like the cell block is inside a giant snow globe. The snowfall increases. The ground is quickly covered in a sparkling layer of white fluff. The marveled inmates reach out to try and feel the snow from their cells. Finally, Blackwell looks back to Jim.
Open the cells.
This hurts Jim. His face falls with a frown.
You still don't believe?
The lever is pulled at the end of the cell block. the cell doors all grind open. Blackwell stares at Jim for a pregnant beat. Finally, he leans down and scoops up a handful of snow. He straightens back up, carefully packs the snow into a round ball, then tosses it at Jim. For the very first time, Blackwell shows Jim a warm, welcoming smile.
Merry Christmas, Jim.
Jim lights up too.
Merry Christmas!
Blackwell scoops up another ball of snow. He then throws it at Winston, who chuckles.
Merry Christmas, boys!
The rest of the inmates all happily step out of their cells. They too start tossing snowballs, wishing Blackwell and each other a Merry Christmas. The other guards glance at one another. They shrug, then join in on the childlike snowball fight. Back in Jim's cell, Jim finally returns to the letter. He opens it.
Dear Jim, all the little boys and girls around the world have you to thank for saving their Christmas, as do I. You never wavered far from your heart, and even managed to remind the troubled souls of Hillgate how to use theirs again. I could not have done it better myself. Thank you, Jim, and Merry Christmas.
Santa Claus is signed below the message.
P.S. Don't worry. You and the boys are safe from the naughty list.
Jim chuckles. He closes the letter and gingerly places it back on his Christmas tree. He then skips out of his cell to join the snowball fight. 1 year later, another glorious Christmas dinner has been spread out across Jim's dining room table. Dinner is just about over, and Jim has been released from Hillgate. He sits in Tyler's usual seat, surrounded by his chipper family. Jim wipes his mouth with a napkin and sits back in his chair. He pats his full belly.
Wow, sure beats prison food, I'll tell you that.
The table laughs with amusement when the nearby cuckoo clock chimes.
Oh boy, I gotta get going. Let me help clean up really quick.
Jim starts to frantically collect dirty dishes. Now Tyler is the one sitting at the kids' table. He twists around in his tiny chair.
No. You go on ahead. We'll clean up.
But you guys did all the cooking.
Jim, last Christmas was a bit of a wake-up call for everyone. You weren't here, and well, that finally made us realize just what you do for this family.
This surprises Jim. He studies the table. The rest of his family silently agrees. They all look to him with loving faces.
We're glad to have you home, Jimbo.
Jim is unable to contain a soft smile.
Thanks, guys.
The heartfelt moment begins to make Mr. Gallinack uncomfortable. He clears his throat.
All right, go ahead. We don't want to hold you up.
Jim happily stands from the table and collects his coat. Moments later, as Jim heads for the front door,
Uncle Jim, wait!
Lisa runs into Jim's arms.
Tell everyone I said Merry Christmas.
I will. And Merry Christmas to you too.
Lisa gives Jim a warm goodnight hug. Later that night, a guard lets Jim through the main gate of Hillgate Penitentiary. Jim strolls down the cell blocks. They've been charmingly decorated just as they were for the escape plan. Jim now enters the mess hall. All the inmates cheer at his arrival. Jim makes his way to a table with excitement. He waves to everyone and wishes them a Merry Christmas. He then takes a seat next to Winston and pats him on the back. Winston nudges Jim for him to look along the back wall. Jim peers over to see Blackwell smiling at them. Jim acknowledges him with a friendly nod, and Blackwell gives a happy one in return. Jim engages with his incarcerated family as they finish up their Christmas dinner. We watch them for a beat, until finally, we fade to black. The end.